like maniacally happy.
Okay, I'm hitting live on Instagram too.
Whoa, we're live everywhere. We're in the future.
Okay. Oronde, can you hear me?
Oronde can hear you.
Can you give me a thumbs up?
Yeah.
And do you see the live stream on Instagram?
I do not see it on Instagram. Now I do. Here it is.
Hello, everybody who is joining in on Instagram. We are going live for our episode of Hot Goss. We are waiting for Oronde to join. He will be here momentarily. Get ready.
Excellent.
I can feel it happening.
It is I.
It is you. Oh, this is so exciting. I can hear me reverberating.
Yeah, I forgot to mute my computer. So there we are.
I do love this fun, like, anticipatory back and forth that inevitably happens when we try to dually go live from Facebook and Instagram at the same time. It makes me sweat through every article of clothing.
It's chaos. It is literal chaos. But it's great to be back, internet. It is lovely doing some hot goss.
Oh my goodness. There's so many people joining. Can you see who they are?
I can.
Oh, good. I cannot possibly read font that small.
Oh, yeah, I'm deeply blind. I'm surprised that I was able to see.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to read the tiny Instagram font, and I will keep tabs on our Facebook comments. Perfect. And then we will dive right in.
Someone just like very rightfully brought up that it's Mercury retrograde, and we're well aware. Feeling the effects.
Wow. Yes, my email literally doesn't work right now.
Yeah, it's too real.
Also, I burned a whole loaf of bread this morning. That's technology too. Fire. Okay. Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Are you so ready? Friends, welcome back to our first episode of Hot Goss of the year of our lives, 2021.
Yes, welcome. Happy New Year, Hot Goslings.
Oh, Happy New Year. And you know, it's a different world than since we did our last Hot Goss about what is it? Love is Blind. I feel like I'm having flashbacks.
Yep, caught in a loop. That was the old script from the last time that we did a Hot Goss about coronavirus. Fresh out the gates at the start of the pandemic, but the world changed.
It has indeed. Oh, Abby Lou says Hot Goslings. It is the age of Aquarius. This is unrelated, but it is the age of the Aquarius. My birthday's in 2 weeks. Everyone wish me a happy birthday. Thank you for noticing, Sam. Tear down capitalism, blah, blah, blah. So we are in a changed world, but also in this sort of funny state of stasis. And so I'm sort of curious, like, why we're revisiting this topic.
That's a great question. So we have done, I think, 2 years worth of Hot Goss at this point, which is bananas. And
since the beginning, not since March, even though it's
since the very beginning. And we've done about, I think, 9 months worth of Hot Goss since the pandemic started. Sure. And that Speak About It always talks about healthy relationships, but we want to kind of revisit some of those topics and those familiar things and kind of put a little bit of twist on them. And so this time we're going to be talking about healthy relationships and specifically as it relates to friendships, right? And friendships in this weird time of coronavirus. So it's going to be, I think, a big one, something that a lot of us are thinking about right now. How do we create and maintain healthy boundaries with our friendships in this weird time that we're living in?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this one because I feel like it keeps coming up in my personal life, and I feel like it keeps coming up in y'all's personal life. So if you have questions or weird sticky situations, please put them related to this, not other sticky situations.
For a different episode.
Yeah, put those in the comments, and we will try to talk through them. But we're going to talk through them because, surprise, neither of us are epidemiologists. Neither of us are technically scientists. And so we are going to be navigating this brave new world alongside you with the information that we've found. And so I would like to think of us as sort of experts in the social side of things. And we're all together using the tools that we have. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And because I do like to pretend that I'm still a scientist, you hear me say a lot, humans are a social species. We need connection. And I'm going to loop back to that, Sam. And I think that like we know that that's true. We know that we need connection, but we don't always look and respect the fact that connection can look like a lot of different things, right? So the way that you love your partner might be different than the way you love your best friend, which might be different than the way you love your favorite pet, right? And so for a lot of folks, like, yeah, like you really love your pet. So
I love cats.
So for a lot of folks, like romantic and sexual relationships can come and go, but friendships seem to be a little bit more stable. And despite that sense of comfort and support, it can still be really hard to set boundaries. We just saw something in one of these comments about a lot of us are finding ourselves kind of closer to people that we previously haven't been close to, right? And so, yeah, friendships, like they do also evolve in a way that really romantic relationships don't always. So
yeah, I feel like I hadn't sort of like drawn that clear distinction between friendships and romantic relationships before, especially around like the stability of them. And like in many ways, it feels like more acceptable to like draw boundaries, whether you think of them as boundaries or not, in like romantic relationships, because you just like don't know that person as well. But like with friendships, like, you know, a lot of my friends will, you know, draw boundaries with their partner about like, oh, I live with you now, so like I have me time. But like you don't hear people like setting me time away from your friends. And yeah, it just like we're all at like our capacity right now and need so much more, and think about our friends as the people who could give that to us, but like I don't know if they can.
Yeah, right. Because like for a lot of us, our friends are one of our major sources of like support and like the people that we turn to when we're stressed. But everyone's really stressed right now. Like everyone's kind of stretched thin, and so expecting that from our friends in the way that we normally do might not be practical. And then also, like I think you're perfectly right, Catherine, that like in romantic situations or sexual situations, like there's tons of conversations, right? Like, what do you want to do together? Are you seeing other people? Do you want to wear condoms? But with your friends, it's typically like, I don't know, like if we're free at the same time, we're going to hang and we'll just kind of do whatever we normally do. And it's like, you just don't really like think as much about those conversations. And so this is like brand new territory in so many ways when we're trying to talk to our friends about like, all right, I might need space, or maybe I can't be that support for you that I previously have been.
And like, oh, go ahead.
No, what were you gonna say?
I was just say, I feel like we're not even that good at having those conversations with romantic partners. So like adding that like layer of like, and my friends are like my go-to people, like just makes it so much more fraught.
Yeah, and like, and I also just want to say real quick about there's also like a series of questions right now that you kind of have to ask when you're like trying to hang out with anyone, but especially with friends. That almost feels accusatory when you're like really getting into it, about being like, I don't know, like, how many people are you seeing? Like, what are you doing about COVID? Like, are you working in public, right? There's like all these questions that feel like I don't know, like a weird almost interview before you decide if you're going to hang out with them. That just like makes it really tough.
Yeah, but they're also like really important right now, but also they can feel judgmental. And I think that happens with like the conversations about like sexual boundaries as well, but like in asking about, have you been tested, in asking about sort of like, who are you hanging out with, you can sort of get into this like, why are you judging and controlling like what I do in my personal life kind of feeling, which like we don't expect often from our friends.
Yeah, and I think actually one of the comments that just came up was, I think, perfectly related to this, that like sometimes it's harder having friends who are roommates, so there's like a really high risk of kind of messing it up. And I think that's true, because like that feeling like you're trying to control them with the questions you're asking can be especially tense with a roommate, right? Because it's like, you're not my parent, right? Like, we're not dating. What are you?
Yeah, I think roommate situations, we can talk a little more about those, but they, I think, are especially challenging right now.
Yeah. And I think also because like this like weird looping back to that sense of judgment, that like I was just talking with a friend that just got into like kind of a big fight with one of their pals. That thing actually made me feel a bit more. I definitely want to loop back to that. If you don't hear us bring that back up, Robbie, like say it again, because that's really interesting. But like the sense of judgment. So this friend got into this fight because they were suggesting that they should get COVID tests before they like hung out. And this person they were talking to like was really upset by it. They're like, oh, so you're saying I'm being irresponsible? You think I'm being immature? Like, you don't think that I'm like taking the precautions I need to take? And this person was like, I didn't say any of that, right? Like, I was just like trying to be safe and trying to open up a conversation. And so these things that like feel like they should be simple questions can really feel like judgmental insinuations just when they wouldn't at other times.
Which I think is like deeply related to how we think about like social diseases, like which COVID is. And like even that phrase, social diseases, is super like coded. And if you want to learn more about how we feel about particularly like STIs and other social diseases and combating that like stigma of even talking about it, we did do another episode about STIs, which I think will like bring some information from that into here. But there's this like stigma to even think that you've been like near potentially somebody who has COVID. It can feel very, very stigmatizing.
Yeah, and I think that it's like we've said it before, and like we should probably say it again in this conversation, that like you're more than your diagnosis, right? So like in an ideal world, and like everybody should hopefully be like staying safe and like following the latest guidelines, but like we shouldn't judge somebody if they are sick, right? But like we wouldn't say call someone like immature if they like got a sinus infection. We wouldn't say that someone's being reckless if they like develop arthritis. And it's like, yes, there like it might be situations that like they could have done something to prevent these conditions, could have done something to prevent COVID, but like at the end of the day, like someone getting sick with something, like we probably shouldn't attack them for it, right? And so like playing the like they were asking for it game is I think really dangerous and like rarely helpful for anybody. And I think I'm gonna kind of like try to tie it in here.
Yeah, Robbie's comment. Yeah.
Yeah, and like seeing like a lot of different roommate situations kind of breaking down because of different levels of risk perception and different levels of tolerance, and then also like being vaccinated right now. That like especially as we're like trying to figure out who we can see, who we can hang out with, like there is like I'm glad you brought up this like almost sense of guilt, right? About being like, ooh, I'm vaccinated and I feel a little bit more comfortable, but like what does that mean for like the risks that I'm taking and for like the people around me? And it's I think, yeah, there's a lot of like really big, like kind of meaty chunks to this. And I'm gonna loop back to that again. I just want to say it, then get it out there once.
Well, and I think this question of like, so how do we evaluate our risks and then like make those choices that like don't cause my roommate situation to break down, or do meet my needs and the people around me? I think that's like a really central question in these times. And so do you have any thoughts about like how to kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I do. I've got a lot of thoughts in case you weren't aware. So I think it's kind of like a case by case basis though. Like and like that being said, I think there's like some things that are probably true across all the situations, and like spoiler alert, like those things that are true across all the situations are like don't do things that are going to maybe hurt those around you. So like our interpersonal relationships, especially our like sexual relationships, have kind of always been about risk management, right? So you meet someone new and you want to make out, but like you don't know their medical history. Like they might have herpes, right? And like or oral herpes. And so you're like, cool, like that's a risk that I have to take. You might want to have sex without a condom, but there's STIs and pregnancy to think about. And it's like, that's a risk you have to take. So I think like first things first is making sure that everyone's educated on the situation and what the risks really are there. And I think once everyone's educated and kind of on the same page with information, I think it's like really a big question. Actually, I'm going to say another like kind of like sweeping thing. I think the good rule here is you can take whatever risks affect you, but you absolutely cannot take a risk that affects another person who did not consent to that risk, right? And so, for example, I've been like really verbal about the fact that like bars and restaurants are like a pretty big risk to me. And so like I'm not judging my peers who are going to bars and restaurants, right? I'm trying to not hang out with folks regularly who are just like in public spaces and like going out drinking, doing things like that, especially if it hasn't been a recent COVID test. If I were to hang out with somebody and find out that they have like regularly been at bars and didn't tell me that, either they didn't offer the information or they lied when I asked, like I would feel personally betrayed because they know that I think that the situation is risky for transmitting the virus. And then they took a risk that they were comfortable taking and then kind of in essence coerced me into taking that same risk. And that feels unfair.
Yeah. I guess like what I'm hearing is like what's so challenging about this time, in particular the way that like coronavirus is transmitted, is that like it is requiring us to think outside ourselves and think outside our bubbles, and then also like ask our friends to be doing the same for like not just you but like the other people around you. And that like that work of asking people to be continually a little more empathetic than maybe comes like immediately is like it's really challenging. And it's like it's hard work. It's like it's I think it could be hard to be like, oh yeah, all of you and your friends like consented to go to like a party mask free, but like it can be hard to remember, but like, oh, did my coworkers sign up for that? Did my roommates? And like, you know, the bubble can like the sort of like second, third, fourth, fifth hand thing can only go so far, but like we are really asking people to like kind of open their lens a little bit.
Yeah. That makes sense? And that definitely makes sense. I also think that like there's a really good comment in here about like it's really tough right now because like sometimes there isn't really the specific guidance that we want from like experts and specifically from the government. And so like that makes this conversation even more tense because it feels like it's all personal values and like not something that's like a standard of acting. And so like that can be especially difficult. I think that it's really important, like because of that, to like look at what the structure of your quarantine is, right? Just like make sure that like if you are seeing some folks, if you do have like your little bubble, make sure that it's people that share those values, right? Because like since the government hasn't given us what those regulations are 100%, then then we need to have that conversation with our sphere, right? And remembering that like we can only really go as far as the person that's least comfortable is willing to go. And something that we say a lot about sex, right? But it's true here. So if you have a friend that's only comfortable hanging out like 8 feet apart outside with masks on, that's what the line is, right? Like there's no need to like try to convince them otherwise. Like if you don't feel comfortable with that, it sounds like that interaction just isn't the right interaction for you. And like I say that with 0% judgment. It's a value neutral statement. It just kind of is what it is.
I'm like having this funny breakthrough moment, and I like really appreciate Sam's comment of like the reason a lot of this feels so hard is not just because we're like kind of still bad at like consent conversations, but also because like there's so much personal responsibility that we're sort of being forced into right now, which is like, it's not a bad thing to feel personally responsible for the people around you, and we all should, but like the stakes are so high right now to take personal responsibility for like everybody else's health and safety. And so like, while I don't think we should abandon that as a goal, like owning and being in your feelings about the fact that it is like, it's pretty hard and you're not getting a ton of like structural support from some of the institutions around you. That can be a lot to feel up against. And so like, do your best within the circumstances.
Well, and related to that, right? But like, if you're feeling like you aren't getting, when we don't feel like we have any like outside guidance, we just do the best that we can with what we have, right? And so like, if you have a friend that's like taking a lot of precautions, like they're doing that because they're trying to keep themselves and their community safe, right? Like don't shame them for that. It's similar to like, you might have some friends that you like go out and go dancing with, and like some friends that you like just do like book club with, right? And you like probably don't shame your book club friends for not wanting to go out dancing more. You just like hang out with them in the way that feels comfortable for them. And like, this is the same thing. Like, don't bully your introverted friends, and like, don't bully your friends that are being like extra cautious in the middle of a pandemic.
I love that. Stop bullying your friends, kids.
Yeah, right? It's like, period.
Speaking of introverts, an experience that I don't have, but I respect a lot. I feel like something I am asking that feels really introverted is like, oh, but is it like actually even okay to hang out with friends?
Oh, heard. And so I'm like thinking two things.
I also am seeing a comment.
Yeah. And basically what the comment is asking is like, it's hard to imagine what after times look like because everything up to this point has been frankly managed a little bit poorly. And so how do workplaces and public spaces phase in non-vaccinated people? And so let's look back to that maybe in a little bit, because I want to answer this question first and then get to that. That's a really good question.
Because Robbie has a thing. It's Danny, and I think Robbie had a similar sort of like, okay, so like, what do you do now?
And so
with like people who are vaccinated.
So we'll make that before like our takeaways. So I think if you're feeling guilty about like thinking about hanging out with friends, like allow me to revisit my like big science moment of like, we're a social species and we need connection. There's plenty of research that's been done showing the negative emotional and physical effects of loneliness and isolation. So no, you're not a bad person for thinking about like, I need to see my friends. How do I make that happen? I think it's all, again, a matter of risk management. And so, but understand we have been mostly in isolation for a year. We've been disrupted from our normal patterns for like a year. And so like, that's fine to be worried about this, but it's dangerous to sacrifice safety for pleasure, right? And so like, just like, don't forget in the midst of all this pandemic fatigue that the goal of all this is like keeping the people we care about safe.
I think that actually is a really good response on Facebook. Ariel mentioned like, okay, so you have all these friends with different risk profiles, but also different people who are looking at different sources for science. And I think there's like a really great way to kind of bridge that and be like, regardless of what you think the science is saying, like we all have desires and those are different than needs. And it's okay to make your desires known, but we need to prioritize like safety for the people around you and like framing that as a sort of like, this is a personal safety thing. Like it's like wearing a seatbelt. It's like this or that. Like you're not going to like tell me to take my seatbelt off just because you don't think you need to wear one. And I think that might be kind of helpful. And again, it's framing it around personal safety and is very individual in a way that like makes me, an Aquarius, feel uncomfortable. But I think that can be a tool for talking to people about who have different sort of like sources of information.
And also like kind of like going off of what you're saying about like framing things like with yourself, I'm going to, I think, maybe give a couple of some strategies for like ways that you can have these conversations with friends and family. And then I want to make sure, like, even if we don't get to the other content that we had kind of pre-mapped, there's some like big comments that I really want to make sure we get to. So I'm going to loop over there afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So my like kind of like tips for, and I think someone's going to play into like this most recent comment, is that the first thing that's really important here is do not feel bad for what you need. Your needs are your needs and they're totally valid, right? It's important to know that whatever boundary you have, no matter what it is real, it's your boundary, and respect that, right? And other people should also respect that. The next thing I'm going to say is like, if you're worried about having these conversations, consider who it is that you're talking to and how do they normally tend to interact with the world around them. And so what do I mean by that? So is this a person that's like really kind of concrete and like they need information? Because they're going to be a person that when you're talking to them, you probably will like want to bring up community spread. You want to probably talk about like the current COVID numbers in your community. Is this a person that like anecdotal evidence like really works well with them? So you maybe want to say to them like, hey, I'm seeing like a lot of my like friends now are like coming down with positive tests and it seems like the bubble is kind of closing in on me. This is all really worrisome. I think I need to tap out of this, right? Or maybe it's a person that like an emotional plea is really how you get to them. And so just be like, hey, I'm feeling really like worried and overwhelmed these days. Like just the possibility of spreading it seems like a huge burden. I just don't think I can hang out. All of those are fine, but all are very different approaches. So almost like considering, I don't want to say consider the source, but I guess it's considering like the person that you're trying to talk to is going to be really important here. So like, in essence, you're like rejecting an invite, and rejection always feels the worst when it's like kind of done without care for the situation or for the person at hand. So I want to say that, and then I'm going to jump into some of these comments before too much time goes by. One of the things, we have a couple of people that are talking about the concept of like being an introvert and being really afraid that after a year of distancing yourself, like, what is that connection going to be like? Like, is it going to be hard to like interact again in general, or in specific, like our interpersonal connections with these specific people going to still be intact? And I think this is a really important time to like almost look at the like how I say yes to asterisk all the time. I think when you're rejecting invitations, it's I think no asterisk, right? And so it's no, I don't want to go and like go to a mask-free party with the other people in your quarantine, but like I do want to feel connected to you. So like, do you want to like have drinks and watch something over Skype or over Zoom, right? Or it's like, I don't want to, I don't know, take a drive with you because being in a car feels really unsafe, but like I do want to like go on a like bundle up and go on a walk right now, and like we can be 8 feet apart, right? So like thinking of what these alternatives are, I think is really important to like let people know that like we're still thinking about them and we're still feeling connected to them. And I think that on both ends, right? So like for like those of us that are a little bit more introverted, like taking that extra effort, that extra step to reach out and say like, hey, love you, but also like, and like we shouldn't like put someone else's well-being on ourselves, I know, but like again, consider the source, right? Like if you know that you have a friend that's like really introverted and like that like reaching out sometimes hard for them, it's maybe good to like take like a little bit of self-inventory and be like, oh, I need to reach out to this person, right? And again, do that to the best of your abilities, because like this is a tough time and like a lot of us are struggling even just getting through for ourselves. And so, and even that, right? Like being like, hey, I love you, I want to reach out to you, but like I'm really spent right now, but just want you to know I'm thinking about you, can really go a long way.
I also think what we've developed I think there's this sort of tension between like wanting to go back to the way things were and sort of this knowing that like when things open up again, like the way things were isn't going to be the way things are now. And so you are allowed to like take some of those skills or tools that you had in quarantine into your like non-quarantine life. So if you're an introvert who's like, oh my God, like Zoom actually really like worked for me and my like 2 college friends that I never got to see in person, like you're allowed to be like, can we adapt this to our new world? Or like, I don't think there's anything wrong with being like, I mean, I think I talk a lot about how it's like, this is not a great time for acquaintances, but like, just because you didn't speak to your acquaintance for like 4 years doesn't mean that like now all of a sudden you can go to restaurants again and you see them, doesn't mean that like you can't like reconnect and be like, remember when we really wanted to like do the thing and like be friends? Like I think we're all going to have to be a little more brave and creative in post quarantine times and like own that the skills need to be learned over time and they'll be new, and that's hard but okay.
And I think being really honest, right? And so I think being able to like say to people like, I'm worried what this looks like, what our friendship looks like a year from now when like we're all back in public. Like I'm worried about like we used to go to a lot of concerts together and like I don't think a concert's gonna be sensory overload for me. I think like I'm not sure how we hang out, right? I think like letting people know that is really important, because it's we all know theoretically that we're going through something, but like it's so hard to know how this is affecting each one of us individually. And so I think like sharing that with the people that we're close to and like can really help to kind of like bridge some of that gap.
Yeah. What you're just saying while you read that comment, like, reminds me of something that, like, we talk about a lot when we talk to kids about consent, where we're like, wouldn't it be such a relief if, like, that girl that you like just, like, told you that she wanted to kiss you? And, like, I remember this moment where, like, a high schooler was like, oh my God, it would be so great. It would take all the, and so, like, taking that sort of, like, wouldn't it be just great? Wouldn't you appreciate it if your friends communicated about how much they wanted to see you or didn't? And so you could do the same. I think it can be really hard to take that first, like, step of just, like, saying what you need out loud to the people around you, because you worry that you'll be rejected. But, like, I think it applies to just, like, needing or not needing social time too.
And I think to that end, this is like only peripherally related to Danny's thing, just because I know that we're getting low on time, but about how do we start to like reintegrate folks like that may have been vaccinated or maybe haven't been vaccinated. And I think that like that's like, I think that like, this is a little bit some of that. So like, I do have some thoughts about like just actual policy of like reopening, but that's like a part of the hospitality thing. So look
maybe
for our
write
other
it to
Instagram
Dr.
page.
Shaw.
Yeah, and so it's like so we can talk about that another time. But I think about like how we start to reintegrate those folks into our lives is a little bit more like those conversations, right? So like that's going to be like ingesting more knowledge, right? Like that first step I said is educating ourselves. So like getting more knowledge about like, all right, so what is the vaccine actually preventing? What does it actually do? Being really honest about like, all right, so how does that fit into my life and my worries and my fears? And then being really honest with our friends, right? Because I think even some of the people that I'm finding myself kind of like surprised that I am keeping in touch with, it's not that I like them more or less than my other friends. It's just that like we happen to have aligned in our values about like how we want to like deal with the pandemic, and that's okay, right? And so I think having like some of those like tough conversations, I think that it seems really big and scary and foreign, like, or like unusual for us now to like think about how will the world look after this. And I truly don't know, but I think that the only way that we get through it is really to be like super honest before like something like comes up that's uncomfortable, and kind of almost like anticipate the discomfort and like just do it by acknowledging it.
I do think that beautiful soundbite that you offered of the like, you have to operate in a way that like signs yourself up for whatever risk you want, but doesn't sign anybody else up. Or like you have to operate, and it's a similar sentiment to like, we can only take the risk that the person who's like the least comfortable will take. And I think like when we're living in a mixed world of vaccinated people and not vaccinated people, is I think that the vaccine is a privilege, and you shouldn't feel guilty about getting it. Like, in theory, you got it because you needed it, and that's amazing. And the more people are vaccinated is great. But like, we need to operate with the understanding that that is a privilege because you are more protected than other people. And so you have to still act in a way, at least when you're around other people, that keeps them safe because they don't have the same protection as you do. And I think we do this all the time. So yeah.
We do. And I think that it's also remembering that like people's boundaries can change, right? And so like you might get vaccinated and someone might be more inclined to want to hang out with you because they're like, oh, sweet, like it seems like less risk, but they might be less inclined to want to hang out with you, right? Because they're like, oh, maybe you're taking bigger risks now, right? And I think it's really important to remember just like consent in general. Just because someone wanted to do something last week doesn't mean they're going to want to do it this week, right? And like just because someone did something with someone else doesn't mean they want to do it with you. And so being really honest and aware of that. And I think even this was my like originally my takeaway message for the day was like, be really aware of like how you were listening to people's boundaries, right? And so we're talking a lot about like expressing your boundaries, but we need to talk about like how do you receive someone else's boundaries. And I think that like a friend might not explicitly state what their boundary is about hanging out with you specifically. But maybe they've told you about like their view on coronavirus in general. They've told you about like their views of other situations, right? They've given you some context clues that are pretty important. And so to them, they've made it clear to you. And so I think that like, in addition to like accepting and respecting the explicit information people are giving us, we need to really be aware of those like implicit cues that people are giving us right now. And if you're not sure about like how someone's feeling, you need to like #just ask, right? And just like make sure that you're clear about it.
Yeah. Did we leave any questions in the Instagram comments unanswered before we sort of like close the book on this?
See, people doing this already with. Yeah, I think that these there are some like good comments, but I think that we can respond to those after the fact or like in the Cool. But also, thank you all so much. There's a bunch of like delightful humans.
This is so lovely.
Sam and Danny.
To hear from all these people and like it was a great conversation. It's a really hard conversation, and I feel like we maybe provoked more questions than we gave answers, which is okay in this time because I think like at the end of the day, we are trying to be more intentional and over communicative in many ways as we sort of like move through more difficult and more risky social situations. And like you said, just asking will get you pretty far, but we have to be like really intentional, and it is hard work.
Mm-hmm. So one, you're welcome. Two, that sounded so bitchy, but like I mean, like
the people on Facebook are like, "What?"
Like, yeah,
they just think you're saying you're welcome to me.
To you. No, someone typed in thank you, and so I was saying you're welcome. Anywho, but the other thing, I want to leave you all with like a little bit of oh, thank you. I want to leave you all with like a little bit of a teaser for what the next one is going to be. Ooh. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're really excited to like revisit some old topics and look at them in new ways. And you've heard us talk about it before, but we're gonna double down on porn. And I think this porn discussion is going to be so fun, so interesting. So please loop back to us for that one. We don't have a date yet, but keep following us on social media. I will say also that like, I don't know why I want to tease it, but I do. We're going to be talking a little bit about OnlyFans also, because it seems like, I know at least in my social group, that there's like a lot of OnlyFans popping up and like conversations about it. So yeah, double down on porn. Yeah. And so
I was going to say, we're going to double down on porn in 2021.
So yeah, hopefully we'll see you all for the next discussion.
Yes, this was so fun. Thank you so much.
I like really missed Hot Goss. I didn't realize.
Yeah, it was so fun. If people have any lingering questions, the comments will be there, or at least the comment section will be there. The comments do disappear, which is a bummer. But just feel free to shoot us any of your questions, and we'll try to do our best to like talk them through with you. And we'll be following this up with a little blog post and some information. So keep the conversation going, and we'll see you next month.
Bye, Goslings.
Bye. This is our favorite part.
I have no idea
how to end it.
End it every time.